And for a further discussion on the assassination, I'm joined by Kay Shimizu in Tokyo. She's a research assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Thanks so much for your time. And we got a little bit of insight there from Phoebe, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper from your expertise. What does this loss of the former Prime Minister mean for Japan?
Well, I think first and foremost, as your reporter just mentioned, there is this sudden sense of loss of security. Many people in Japan feel as though, on the one hand, that Japan has sort of sat on its haunches and taken peace within the country for granted, especially during these couple of years of the COVID pandemic, where we had extremely few foreign visitors into Japan. And so it is sort of a signal to Japan that the world, in fact, has changed, and that our stance towards security in particular, both domestic and international, has got to change, and awareness of that. But on the political front, I think it's also true that as the elections move forward today, that there is a sense that people must participate, have their voices heard. And so many people believe that there will be a greater turnout in these upper house elections, even though most people already understood that the LDP has a very strong support going forward, and that Prime Minister Kishida would most likely have an increase in the number of seats that the LDP wins in the upper house.
Yeah, in fact, it's been an interesting couple of days in the lead up to these elections, or certainly since the assassination of Abe. And from what I understand, mainstream media outlets in Japan have avoided calling the death of Abe an assassination. Some media outlets struggling to balance the reporting of his death without indirectly giving an advantage to his ruling party. Is that the reason the word assassination wasn't used, or is there more to it than that, do you think?
I think there is some truth in what you have just said, but also that there is, a sense that the investigation has just begun. It's not really clear if there was a clear motive to target just Prime Minister Abe, although in fact by now we know that in fact that was true. And so there is a difference in how Japan approaches investigations, and who have, prosecutors and judges and such, and who has the upper hand in narrating, controlling the narrative surrounding the incident. And so media are also very careful to tread around this, especially in recent years, as there has been a lot of, especially foreign criticism towards Japan's judicial system, and how there is little room for a non-guilty outcome. Of course, this case is in some ways very clear. There's a lot of video footage, both by official media as well as social media, that surrounded the incident. And so there may be very little doubt as to who committed the crime. But again, the media has been a little more hesitant than before, let's say before the 1940s, in terms of naming this incident an assassination.
And now, Japan uses capital punishment for, quote, atrocious crimes. Would the killing of Abe fit into that category, do you think?
Well, that's a very difficult question. But on the one hand, I think that the capital punishment will most very likely not be applied to this incident, because there has only been one death, even though, of course, former Prime Minister Abe is perhaps the most well-known post-war leader in Japan. And it is unlike previous cases where capital punishment has been applied, where multiple people were killed. And so, although there will be most likely a very harsh punishment applied to this case, capital punishment may be quite unlikely.
Now, we touched on the elections already, but obviously people are heading to the polls today. There were some questions around whether or not the vote should be rescheduled. What kind of an impact do you think the killing will have on the elections today? And also, do you have an outcome that you're expecting from the elections?
Well, first and foremost, I think people are now very much more aware of both the elections and the importance of the elections, and the impact that individuals can have by going to the polls. And so I definitely expect that the turnout will be much higher than had this incident not happened. Also, support for the LDP, if only from a sense of nostalgia and a sense of loyalty to one who has been downed in a way that was certainly not both expected and not deserved, would support more people to support his party, the ruling LDP. Would that change the outcomes that were expected from before? Perhaps not in a major way in terms of just the outcomes of the election. But I think the bigger impact will be what happens after the election and how empowered the ruling party, the LDP, will feel in terms of how much support they get from the public and how then Prime Minister Kishida going forward can motivate his party to move in a more emboldened way, especially towards issues of national and international security as it pertains to Japan.
Kay, really appreciate your time. Kay Shimizu in Tokyo for us from the University of Pittsburgh.
Thank you.